So let's talk about the music. You are making an album you are so proud of, you want to professionally release it around the world. So in this lecture, we're going to talk about pre-production planning, production efficiency, and post-production organization to set yourself up for success for that internationally released album. When it comes to setting yourself up for success for an album project, so much of that occurs before ever recording a single note. The pre-production phase is so important. I can't stress that enough. Writing, arranging, scheduling, budgeting, and keeping organized from the very beginning are what will ensure that you have a smooth process from the very dawn of the creation of your album to the very day that it is released internationally. Again, I am approaching this lecture series from the personal experience that I have releasing an album, but this can apply to any sort of recording project that you are doing and that you intend to release, whether that's an EP or a few singles. I hope that you apply these concepts in a similar way. So, when it comes to writing, if you are doing an album project like I did, the things that I considered were themes and cohesion. How am I going to make this entire album work together? Have all the tracks have a cohesive element that provides a trajectory or a narrative across the entire album. You can achieve that through lyrical content. You can achieve that through the musical style across the album. This is especially pertinent to instrumentation, right? Because if you have additional instrumentation that you will need to have collaborators come in to record, that's going to be a part of your pre-production planning. That's going to require recording session scheduling that in order to maximize efficiency, you'll want to know the tracks that you'll have additional collaborators on ahead of time so that you can call them into the studio to knock out all those tracks at once rather than calling them back each time for each new song that you think they might have some additional content for. As an example, my album has several tracks that feature additional string harmonies to supplement the acoustic guitar and vocal parts that I did myself. So I had to call in some friends, some collaborators to come into the studio to record those parts, and I was not as forward thinking as I should have. It was my debut album, and I hadn't learned these tips and tricks that I'm telling you now. So it was a little inefficient to call them in every single time I had just a few lines of music for them to play. Had I known ahead of time that I would want these additional string layers in this track, and that track, I could have waited and incorporated that into my recording session scheduling and had them come in one time to knock out all of the tracks that I wanted them on. That was a lesson I learned through experience that I'm telling you so that hopefully you can take it into account from the very beginning to maximize your production efficiency. Another thing I learned through experience of writing Exhale, the album, was how to create that sense of cohesion across the album using thematic materials. So I decided that Exhale was going to explore several recurring themes throughout. These themes include breath and just the sort of vitality of being alive, as well as some themes of death and mortality, choice, love, loss. All of these are explored in some way and often explored differently as you progress through the album to kind of demonstrate an emotional trajectory and a emotional growth as the narrative behind the album. As I was diving into those themes, I found myself incorporating some material over and over again, particularly something that will be the most iconic to the album, which is a recording of me taking a deep inhale and letting out a deep exhale. I scatter those sound clips throughout the album in between lyrics or in spaces or silences to really drive home the concept that these are all connected and this is really an emotional trajectory and a narrative of an inhalation all the way to an exhalation. And that's actually how the intro and outro tracks of the album that bookend the album came into being, with the instrumental that starts the album being called Inhale and featuring a deep inhale towards the end, and the outro of the album featuring the same instrumental content but with a deep exhale at the end. So, I am by no means suggesting that you have to follow this exact construction or conceptualization of your album or project the way I did, but this is just one example of how to achieve that cohesion across the album to where every track plays a role contributing to the whole. And knowing that as you head into production is key for maximizing efficiency and making sure that you are setting yourself up for a smooth process from there on out. So, moving on to arranging, I touched on this briefly when I described to you the additional string layers that I have in my album, but I want to really drive home a few tips and tricks for how to arrange additional parts so that your recording session will be as smooth as possible. I will also note that arranging is not just for additional parts that you might want to add to your tracks, but it is an important part of your own process of writing so that you have a nicely notated and typeset piece of music that you can reference thereafter, particularly in any subsequent recording sessions to overdub any mistakes or to add layers. And in the mixing and mastering process, you will have a physical, musically notated reference for how the track is supposed to go. Additionally, having your songs fully notated in this manner will allow for a much easier and faster publishing process later on. So, make sure you are writing down your songs in some sort of score format. This score should be clear, easy to read, with rehearsal marks and measure numbers, particularly in any sort of section by section or layer by layer method by which you will want to record. So, once you have diligently done all your pre production planning, your arranging, recording session scheduling, and you are ready to record, I want to give you some tips and tricks, not only as an audio engineer from the recording side of the glass, but as a performer on the artist side of the glass. So, something that I cannot stress enough is tuning, timing, playing with a click track, those types of things that are unique to recording session environments that not all performers are quite as experienced in or quite as comfortable with. There is a level of perfection that is not only expected for a professional album release, but is possible and achievable in this very incredible way when you are in the recording studio. You have the opportunity to get the best take possible. So take that opportunity and do it well and be prepared to do so. Don't let something as simple as being out of tune or not being comfortable playing with a click track get in your way to making that really perfect recording. Another thing that is absolutely critical to the success of your recording session is clear communication. This means that every time you stop or start a new section, you are providing measure numbers and rehearsal marks clearly so that everyone knows exactly where in the track you are starting and stopping. As well as anytime you stop for feedback, it is not only positive but productive that you know what you're looking for if you're giving feedback to your performer, or know how to make a request to an engineer who's recording you. This type of clear communication will absolutely maximize your efficiency in your recording sessions and make sure that everything stays organized, positive, and productive during recording. Being able to communicate like this also demonstrates your expertise. Having expertise on both sides of the glass is something that's very important to a successful album production. Once you have successfully recorded all of the content for your album, you are ready to move into post-production. I could talk endlessly about mixing and mastering, but that's what other lectures are for. So, for the purposes of this talk, I just want to give you a heads up on what the digital distribution partners will be expecting as the format of your final audio file. The expected file for submission will be a WAV file with a sample rate of 44.1 kilohertz and a bit depth of 16 bit. Now, you might have recorded all of your tracks at a higher sample rate and larger bit depth, perhaps 48 kilohertz or even 96, and often a bit depth of 24. So keep those audio bounces as well. But for the purposes of digital distribution, you will need to upload a converted file at 44.1 16-bit. I cannot stress this enough in terms of organization, because what we will soon be learning in the next part of this lecture series is something called your ISRC. And that's a code that is assigned to that audio file that you upload that is then a code like DNA. So anytime that audio is streamed, be that on the streaming services that your distributor sent to, or somewhere uploaded on the internet like YouTube, it's being tracked. But the only way that's possible is if you've made sure that it's the same file. So you need to make sure your final masters are organized, dated, and clearly named, so that anytime you are sending that anywhere, uploading it anywhere, any radio station that has asked you to provide it, it is the exact same audio file that you've submitted to your PRO and your distributor as the final version. By following these pre-production planning suggestions, these production efficiency tips, and the very important post-production guidelines, you are now ready to start the business side of professionally releasing your album.